What if the greatest battles we remember were never meant to be fought? What if the reasons we were told were only part of the story carefully shaped to sound noble, while the truth quietly waited beneath the surface? Could you please clarify? What do you mean by Sham War? There are a few possibilities, and I want to make sure I give you the correct historical information. Here are some interpretations. Asterisk 1. Asterisk asterisk. Do you mean sham war, as in a fake or staged war, such as political or propaganda-based conflicts like Cold War fronts or fabricated justifications for war? Asterisk 2. Is Shem referring to the ancient city of Damascus or the Levant region historically called Bilad al-Shem, meaning a war between the USA and a region in the Middle East? Asterisk 3. Are you referring to a specific war that is considered controversial or unjustified, like the Iraq War 2003 or Vietnam War, which critics sometimes describe as sham wars? Asterisk, please confirm which one you mean, or give a little more detail, so I can provide a historical summary tailored to your topic. Asterisk, in 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident became a pivotal moment in American history, used to justify large-scale involvement. In the Vietnam War, the U.S. government claimed that North Vietnamese patrol boats attacked American destroyers in international waters. The incident led to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which granted President Lyndon B. Johnson authority to use military force in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. At the time, it was presented as a clear and unprovoked act of aggression, prompting swift political and military responses. However, later investigations and declassified documents revealed that the reality was far more complex. The first reported attack on August 2nd may have occurred, but the second, which was used as the primary justification, likely never happened. Intelligence reports were ambiguous, radar readings were misinterpreted, and communications were confused. Despite these doubts, the administration used the incident to galvanize public and congressional support for escalating military action. This led to the deployment of hundreds of thousands of American troops, and a conflict that would last over a decade. As the war dragged on, opposition grew, especially as more information emerged about the questionable nature of the Tonkin events. The American public began to feel misled, and the incident became symbolic of the broader distrust in government during the Vietnam era. It also marked a turning point in how wars could be initiated with limited oversight, raising important questions about democratic accountability and the manipulation of facts for political ends. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is often cited by historians as a classic example of a sham war justification where selective or exaggerated information led to real and devastating consequences. It serves as a cautionary tale of how a single narrative, when unchecked, can shape the course of history and cost countless lives. Asterisk, in 2003, the United States launched a full-scale invasion of Iraq, citing the urgent threat posed by weapons of mass destruction. President George W. Bush and key administration officials claimed that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear weapons, and that these could be used against the US or its allies. They also suggested a connection between Iraq and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, linking the invasion to the broader war on terror following the 9/11 attacks. These arguments were presented to the American public and the international community as matters of urgent national security. However, over time, extensive searches found no stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. Intelligence reports used to justify the war were later discredited or revealed to have been exaggerated. Some analysts had warned before the war that the evidence was weak, but these voices were largely ignored or suppressed. The Bush administration faced growing criticism for allegedly cherry-picking intelligence and overstating the threat to push for military action. The result was a long and bloody conflict that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, thousands of American soldiers, and massive regional instability. The war also sparked a humanitarian crisis, with millions of people displaced and infrastructure destroyed. In the years following the invasion, bipartisan investigations and international inquiries confirmed that the rationale for war had been deeply flawed, The absence of WMDs damaged the credibility of the United States globally and led to deep public mistrust in government institutions at home. Many Americans and Iraqis alike came to see the war as unnecessary and based on a false premise, an example of a powerful nation engaging in a conflict not out of necessity, but due to poor judgment, misinformation, and political ambition disguised as national defense. Throughout history, economic and political interests have often influenced the United States' decision to go to war. Even when humanitarian or security reasons were publicly emphasized, in many cases, access to natural resources, especially oil, played a key role. The Middle East, with its vast petroleum reserves, has been a focal point of U.S. foreign policy, and interventions in countries like Iraq, Libya, and Iran have raised suspicions that economic motives were deeply intertwined with military decisions. The 1991 Gulf War, for example, was officially launched to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. But critics noted that protecting oil flow from the Persian Gulf was a primary concern. Similarly, in 2003, the invasion of Iraq not only targeted ALLEGED weapons of mass destruction but also conveniently positioned American companies to gain access to Iraq's oil infrastructure during the post-war reconstruction phase. Beyond natural resources, strategic positioning and regime change have driven interventions. The Cold War era was marked by proxy wars and coups, often disguised as efforts to stop communism, but closely tied to maintaining U.S. geopolitical dominance. In Latin America, the U.S. supported or orchestrated the overthrow of governments that threatened American business interests, particularly in agriculture and mining, under the justification of protecting democracy. These actions often ignored the will of the local populations and led to long-term instability. Political calculations have also played a role in wartiming, with leaders sometimes using foreign conflicts to rally national support or distract from domestic issues. These economic and political motivations are rarely admitted publicly at the time, but declassified documents and historical analysis later reveal the deeper layers behind major military actions. While national security is the stated goal, underlying factors like profit, control, and influence have often shaped U.S. military strategy in ways that raise difficult ethical questions. Media has played a powerful role in shaping public perception of war in the United States, often acting as both a messenger and a tool for government messaging. During times of conflict, the U.S. government has strategically used media to build, support, manage dissent, and control the narratives surrounding military action. In the lead-up to wars such as the Vietnam conflict, the media initially reflected government claims, including the events of the Gulf of Tonkin. Through press briefings and controlled access, officials were able to project confidence and justify escalation while downplaying the chaos on the ground. It wasn't until reporters gained more direct access to war zones that contrasting images began to emerge, gritty, bloody, and far from the sanitized stories told in Washington. These broadcasts helped shift public opinion against the war. A similar pattern unfolded during the Iraq War. Leading up to the 2003 invasion, major news networks widely reported claims of weapons of mass destruction, often without rigorous facts. Journalists were embedded with military units, which gave them protection and access, but also placed limits on what they could freely report. Images of bombings, military victories, and American strength dominated early coverage, while civilian casualties and dissenting voices were largely absent from mainstream screens. After the initial invasion, as the conflict dragged on and no WMDs were found, media began to scrutinize the official narrative more critically. However, by then, public support had already been shaped by months of government-influenced reporting. This strategic media use created a distorted sense of urgency and justification for war, with truth taking a back seat to patriotic messaging. Over time, these patterns have exposed how easily media can be used not just to inform, but to deep concerns about journalistic independence, political pressure, and the real cost of promoting simplified stories about complex conflicts. The human cost of war has always been immense, but in conflicts often labeled as sham or unjustified, the suffering of innocent civilians becomes even more tragic. When wars are waged on questionable grounds, it is often ordinary people, men, women, and children, who bear the worst consequences. In the Vietnam War, entire villages were destroyed, millions of civilians were killed or wounded, and generations were left scarred by chemical warfare such as Agent Orange. Families were displaced, cultures disrupted, and trust in governments shattered, both within Vietnam and in the United States. In Iraq, the toll was equally devastating. From 2003 onward, airstrikes, ground battles, and sectarian violence led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians. The war dismantled the country's infrastructure, causing long-term shortages of clean water, electricity, and medical supplies. Hospitals were overwhelmed, schools destroyed, and basic safety vanished from daily life. Refugees fled their homes by the millions, seeking safety in neighboring countries or uncertain futures abroad. Children were especially affected, growing up in conflict zones, often without education, stability, or hope. Psychological trauma spread through generations, invisible yet deep. When political leaders mislead their citizens into war or act without clear justification, the moral weight of these civilian losses becomes even heavier. For many affected communities, the war didn't end when foreign troops withdrew. It left behind ruined cities, economic collapse, and emotional wounds that never fully heal. The long-term consequences also reach veterans and soldiers who return home carrying physical injuries and emotional burdens from participating in a war later revealed to be misrepresented. The scale of destruction in these situations often far outweighs the strategic gains. The true cost is measured not in territory or politics, but in broken lives and generations left to rebuild from the wreckage of decisions made far from their homes. As time passes and the truth behind certain wars comes to light, reflection often leads to regret. Many U.S. veterans who fought in wars like Vietnam or Iraq later speak openly about the emotional weight they carry not just from combat, but from realizing they were part of conflicts built on misinformation or political manipulation. Soldiers who believed they were defending freedom sometimes came to question the mission itself. This sense of betrayal can lead to lasting psychological scars, including moral injury, where the deep conflict between personal ethics and wartime actions causes emotional distress long after the battlefield is left behind. Civilians, too, express regret not only for the lives lost, but for having supported wars based on misleading narratives. As the media revisits events and historians uncover declassified documents, public opinion often shifts. What was once seen as patriotic can later be viewed as misguided or even unethical. During the Vietnam War, it took years of protests, soldier testimonies, and photographic evidence to awaken many Americans to the grim realities they had been shielded from. The Iraq War followed a similar path, where early support gave way to disillusionment when no weapons of mass destruction were found and the country descended into chaos. This process of reflection often prompts national debate about accountability, truth in leadership, and the limits of military intervention. Apologies may be offered, but they rarely repair the damage done. Memorials are built, not just to honor the fallen, but to serve as reminders of the cost of misplaced trust. Reflection creates an opportunity for learning and change, but it also brings pain. It reveals how fear, ambition, or ideology can override truth, and how easy it is for powerful nations to make decisions that affect millions. From these hard lessons comes the hope that future choices might be guided more by wisdom than by impulse. War leaves behind more than ruins, and graves it leaves behind questions, truths delayed, and wounds that history struggles to heal. When nations move toward conflict on the back of false promises or hidden motives, the price is paid not by the powerful, but by the innocent. The history of the United States and its so-called sham wars is not just a story of battles fought. It is a reflection of choices made, truths manipulated, and lessons learned at the cost of human lives. But in understanding this history, there is also hope. The hope that by facing the past honestly, future generations will demand better, more truth, more justice, and more peace. Because the true strength of any nation lies not in the wars it wins, but in the courage it shows to question, to reflect, and to choose compassion over conflict. Asterisk.